Have you this morning. I want to begin just with a quick shout out. I know yesterday was our Mother's Day tea, and that has become, well, it's an old tradition that became a new tradition since we had 2 years of COVID. But I know there were so many people that put so much effort into making that awesome. And I heard it was amazing. That's what I heard. I don't know. I wasn't there. But if you were part of the committee, the groups that were doing stuff, would you please stand? Can we just kind of honor you for a second? You know who you are. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I want to say a special shout out to Stasia Sanchez, who worked her tail off. My wife, who worked her tail off. Everybody did, but you know what I'm saying, like extra and beyond. And Yuri. The three of them, I think it's safe to say that Tay and Zach and I were widowers for the past week and a half, 2 weeks, so we're happy to have our wives back on Mother's Day. Hey, man, anyways. But so glad that went well. We are in the middle of a series entitled Reconstructing Faith. We've been talking about this idea of reconstruction. And we say reconstruction because there's sort of this common sort of thought out there these days about deconstruction. Everyone's deconstructing things, right? And it's easy to throw stones and pick things apart. Much harder to build something, right? I could complain and gripe and whine about all kinds of things and talk about what's bad, but I do nothing to build anything. And that's kind of I think, a very dangerous cultural trend. So we want to acknowledge and understand, you know what? There are times when we kind of need to take things apart so we can rebuild them better, right? And that's what reconstruction is. It's like, okay, let me sort of address some fundamental things that maybe just aren't quite right about this thing, right? Maybe it's a house or a structure of some kind, but we're talking about our faith. And we go, okay, what are some things perhaps that I've questioned or I'm wondering about? What do I do with that? I don't blow it all up. I don't complain about the preacher. I don't whine about this. I kind of go, okay, well, what does this mean exactly? Let me get back to what faith is. And so we've been talking about reconstructing faith the last couple weeks. And we began by talking about and reminding ourselves of the fact that really at the core of our faith is the way of Jesus. It's the way of Jesus, not the idea of Jesus. Like it's the way, it's a way of life that we are living the way Jesus did, the way God called us to, our Creator, right? That's the core of our faith is the way of Jesus. And we talked last week about the fact that we need to understand who God is, right? Because, if we're going to build solidly on our faith, we have to understand the very nature of God. And the nature of God is a Father. That means different things to different people. We've all had different experiences with fathers in our lives, but the Bible shows us a very clear picture of the perfect Father, and that is God. And so, we talked about last week, we unpacked some of the things that describe a perfect Father, and hopefully you've been able to, in your own Bible study, to kind of dig into that. There's a lot of things that we could understand there. Now, I would say this isn't necessarily a linear process, right? Where, okay, which one's first? God's character, the Father, the way of Jesus, how do we put this together? I'm not trying to present all this in some kind of a 5-step, clean, easy formula, okay? Sometimes reconstructions are messier than that. If you've been following our Instagram account, you know that we are remodeling our bathroom, and it's kind of a work in process. Like one thing looks great, there's still a hole in the ceiling. Oh, this looks great over here, but there's no tub. And there's not a whole lot of rhyme or reason except for, sometimes you have supplies, sometimes you don't, but sooner or later it'll all be put together, right? It's kind of a little bit more like that, right? Faith isn't some kind of formula. Sorry, all y'all math people out there, right? It's a little more. It all kind of comes together in a different kind of a fashion. So today I want to talk, but the title of my message today is, well, what about rules? Okay, we talked about foundations a little bit, but there's still this kind of pesky thing of rules, right? What about the rules? I mean, tell me what the rules are. Some of you guys, you don't want to know about all the deep stuff. Just tell me what I'm supposed to do, right? What about rules? And I think this one is interesting because we tend, generally speaking, to fight rules. Many of us do, right? Why is that? No one wants to answer that question. Because we don't like limitations, do we? It's like nobody puts baby in the corner, man. Don't limit me, right? Like, don't tell me what to do. I mean, this is in our DNA. In Texas, I mean, one of our slogans is come and take it, right? You ain't taking my rights from me. Oh, we had fun back during the pandemic talking about masks, didn't we? Who made that rule? Whose rule? You know, it's like, oh my goodness, I'm not even going there. I'm not trying to give everybody hives this morning, but you know, rules make us crazy, right? Some of y'all are like, no way, no one tells me rules. And other people are like, but it's the rule, and all this stuff. I mean, this country fought an entire revolution because of taxes, right? I don't like taxes. Let's throw the tea in the ocean. I don't know. I think about that every time I write my check for my property tax. How about you? It's like maybe we need another. You know what I'm saying? It's just in our nature, right? We don't like rules. It's kind of the thing, right? But yet, rules are kind of this necessary part of any society. You have to live by social rules to be in society together, right? That's kind of how that works. And you know, so in our case, it's kind of funny, right? Because we threw all the tea in the ocean and we got rid of the British, and what did we do? Make rules and tax. Got to tax everybody because, I guess it doesn't really work without taxes. You see what I'm saying? You know, we don't like rules, but rules are there for a reason. I personally hate speed limits. I really don't like speed limits. I think the speed limit should be however fast my car goes. That's a limit, right? That limits me. I mean, I can only go so fast because my car is only so fast. And especially when you're out in West Texas, right? I mean, there's nobody else out here. Why is there even a speed limit? But there is a point to speed limits, right? Because maybe you can drive 90 miles an hour and safely do it. But there's some other yahoo, if he goes 90, he's going to wreck into you, right? So people do studies, and there's reasons even for speed limits. I'm not going to get any more into that because I don't want to feel guilty. So anyway, you understand my point. To be in society together, there has to be rules. But you know, we often have to make this move. Those of you who have raised toddlers know how this goes, right? You kind of go from rules like, hey, you know, don't do this, do that, and then suddenly it becomes why. Anybody in the why stage right now? I'm looking at you, Clements, back here in the corner. I figured that's probably where you are. Some of the rest of y'all are too. But you know, it's why. Everything is why. Hey, don't touch the blinds. Why? I'm about to say VCR, but we don't have one of those anymore. I've had VCR since 2003. I don't know what's going on with that. But anyways, don't touch the blinds. What do they do? Well, why? Well, because they might fall off. Why? Well, because they're held in by these screws that if you pull on them, they might come out. Why? Well, because, screws have a weight-bearing load of only 20 pounds, so therefore we pull on. Well, why? Well, it's physics, you see. And you go on and on, right? It's like, why? And then you begin asking yourself, why did I have children? But it's all part of growing up, right? This is all part of maturation. It's kind of how we are. We learn many times we learn the what before we understand the why. Even as Christians, I think sometimes we learn a lot of whats before we really understand the whys. And sometimes we don't even always understand all of the whys. But the quote, I use this word rules loosely, but there are rules, right? Looking at Exodus chapter 19. I want to take us back a little bit to last week's discussion for just a moment. In chapter 19 and verse 3, this is the passage, the context is God establishing his covenant with Israel. And it says, then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called him to the mountain and said, this is what you are to say to the descendants of Jacob, and what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. these are the words you are to speak to the Israelites. So Moses went back and summoned the elders of the people and set before them all the words the Lord had commanded him to speak. The people all responded together, we will do everything the Lord has said. So Moses brought their answers back to the Lord. You know, we talked last week about the foundation of our faith being founded in it being beginning with relationship, right? It's a relationship with God. And as we read this passage, you see relationship kind of embedded in this. God says to them, he says, look, you know, first of all right, I carried y'all out of I got you guys here, right? I got you out of the mess. I showed myself. I reached out to you. I saved you. I did this for you. Now, here's the thing. You know, we have a covenant now. If you choose to obey me, then we are in this covenant relationship. You see, even that is founded not in some kind of like kind of sterile, you know, environment where there's no reason or rhyme. God is reaching out to us for a relationship, and he's saying, look, these are the rules, if you will, of how we can be together. Does that make sense? They're the rules, the expectations, but they are grounded in relationship. I shared last week about how Angela and I have been married for 29 years. Not 19, right? And, you know, we were dating a long time ago. You know, I didn't start with rules. I told you that last week, right? I didn't start with, hey, honey, hey, how you doing there, Angela? Here's the 15 rules we're going to obey as we talk or whatever. But in time, as our relationship grew and we decided to date one another exclusively, we began then to have conversations about what the ground rules were going to be for our relationship. What the physical ground rules were going to be, right? What kind of boundaries we were going to have with each other. How much time we were going to choose to spend together. You know, in that time, we were both in ministry on a mission field, so we were pretty busy. But we had to kind of establish some rules of engagement, right, that we chose to live by in our relationship. In the same way, you know, God initiates his relationship with Israel. He initiates that relationship with us. But then there are also rules of engagement for how we are to live and to be in a covenant relationship with God. And with any relationship, there are expectations. There are rules or laws that are established to set the parameters of that relationship. Now, when we fast forward, because we see this kind of in the beginning of Israel, and you know what, the cool thing about that moment in time is that everybody listening to Moses that day had walked through the Red Sea. They had seen God's movements with their own eyes. And so for them that day to kind of go, all right, hit me with it. What's the 10 Commandments? Or the 276, or however many it is. We're in. Don't even know what you're going to say yet, but we're in. That relationship was strong, right? Now, as you fast forward many, many years, what tends to happen about rules? They become distant and separated from the relationship sometimes, and they become distant and separated from the original purpose, which takes us back to why, right? Why? Why is this? And so you get to the time of Jesus, and the use of rules and regulations had exploded to the point that the relational connection, the why, if you will, was completely lost. I mean, the Pharisaical system of Jesus' day, I mean, they had rules on top of rules on top of rules to make sure no one broke the rules, right? And that just sounds exhausting, just saying that. But look what Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5 and verse 17. It's easy at this point to deconstruct, right? And say, you know what? Rules are terrible. Rules are stupid. Why do we have rules? Forget the rules. I'm going to live by my own rule, which is a rule, by the way. We just kind of want to throw it all to the wind and tear it all down, but it makes that by itself is a problem as well. But look what Jesus says. He says, do not think, in verse 17, to these people who were all into the rules, way more than you or I, by the way. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen, will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Therefore, anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commands and teaches others accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. Now, Jesus was the most anti-establishment guy I know, right? I mean, he's not all about the establishment. In fact, he was outside the establishment and they hated him. They killed him eventually. But yet, at the same time, Jesus wasn't about thumbing his nose at the rules. He was interested in the heart of God, and he acted accordingly. Because, see, those rules had some foundation somewhere way back in something that was right and good. They had just lost their way in time. And so what does he do? The Sermon on the Mount, this is the very beginning of his sermon, right? The rest of the sermon is a refocusing of the rules of relationship with God. Jesus taking them back to relationship because so many of the religious systems and the religious rules that kind of gotten tacked on over time, they detached everyone from God. And in some cases, even directly opposed the original intent of the rule itself, right? So let me explain. We won't have time to read the entire sermon, but I'm going to kind of make the points of the things that Jesus makes a point about, right? These are the things that Jesus spoke on. He said, and the rhythm is, hey, you've heard it said. When he says that, that's the rule. That's the rules being talked about at the time. Some of that it comes straight from the Ten Commandments. Others were things that were kind of tacked on. He says, do not, you've heard it said, don't murder. That's a good thing, right? It's don't murder. Well, guess what? He says, you shouldn't do that, but you shouldn't even be angry. Because the heart of the rule is relationship. So we can kind of say, well, I didn't murder anybody, but you're running around with an attitude about everybody, and that's a problem, right? Jesus says you should not carry bitterness towards your brother. Because reconciliation is the heart of God, not anger. It's a relational, you see. To think of murder as a rule is kind of not relational. Most of us in here haven't committed murder. You're probably not going to. And maybe you have, and that's another conversation of reconciliation with God. But for the vast majority, that's not something we struggle with. Oh, but we struggle with attitudes. We struggle with bitterness. We struggle with holding on to anger towards people. And Jesus is saying to us, look, the heart of God, the relationship side of God says, look, yeah, the rule is don't murder, but the point is we should live in reconciliation with everyone around us. He says, don't commit adultery. You've heard it said, don't commit adultery. Well, yeah, okay, that makes sense. We shouldn't commit adultery. But what happens is we go, okay, well, that's sort of the boundary, that's the rule, but then we miss the point of the whole law in the first place, which is don't take what's not yours. And Jesus says, look, it all starts with lust because you look at something that doesn't belong to you and you desire it for yourself. In this case, it's another human being. They don't even belong to you. And so it's a respect for relationship. You see how all these laws kind of come back to relationship. And so God says, look, if we're going to live in community with each other, you can't be running around, committing adultery, but you also can't be lusting after somebody that doesn't belong to you. That's the core of the problem. He says, you've heard it said that you can divorce your wife. Divorce. Basically what they were saying was, the rule of the day was divorce is okay. Because during the time of Moses said, well, you know what, it's going to happen. He kind of acknowledged that kind of in the fact that, look, humans are messy, and we all understand that. Some of us have experienced that in this room. He says human beings are messy, and so divorce might happen. And so let's just kind of, okay, if it has to happen, it has to happen. Let's not condemn everybody if there's mistakes are made and there's divorce. But then what happens over time is they have a whole system of what they can do. And so it came to a point in Jesus' day where there was an any cause divorce clause. So basically, instead of it being an extreme thing that, okay, happens once in a blue moon because of extraordinary circumstances, it kind of became the way of things. And when the original intent was to protect the women in society from being abused by men. Let's just be real, that's what it was. It's a breach of covenants. And so over time, it kind of became, anybody can do it. But that's against the principles of God's nature. Why? Because of relationship. It's a covenant you make. He says, you've heard it said, do not swear falsely. Now, this is a tough one. He's not talking about cuss words, although, you can put that in there if you want. But he's talking about you making commitments about things and then calling God into it and pulling God into your promises. He's like, look, leave God out of it, right? You let your yes be yes and your no be no. Why? Don't make God responsible for your bad decisions, right? Your bad oaths. Like, you don't call God into that. I was like, that doesn't make any sense, right? Again, it's about relationship to God. Why would we want to use God and pull God into something that's not his, in a sense, right? Is what he's saying. He goes on, he says, you've heard it said, an eye for an eye, which on the surface, hey, that's biblical because really, what was it? It was a restitution thing. Hey, if I go over to your house and I break your dishwasher, well, I should probably get you a new one. Right? I mean, that's just the right thing to do. It's an eye for an eye. If you come over and kill my dog, well, I'm going to kill your dog, right? That's not how, that's kind of, I'm just kidding. But that's kind of how the rule goes, right? I don't have to exercise that right, but for us to be resolved, you know what I'm saying, right? It's like there's this restitution thing that, okay, if I'm wrong in a way, then you're going to make me right by me, right? Jesus says that's the rule, but really that was kind of more, just like divorce was kind of more of almost like okay, we got to resolve this somehow. It's the best thing to do. But the heart of it, the heart of God, is different. It's a forgiveness and a love that forgives others versus claiming your right to restitution. It's a different view of justice that isn't something to be claimed, but something to be given because of relationship. And the next one's just like it. He says, you've heard it said, hate your enemy. Well, and love those who, it makes perfect sense human nature-wise. Well, my enemy, I hate him, and my friends, I love them. Jesus is like, why shouldn't you love your enemies? Again, the heart of God, who loved us, by the way, when we were still his enemies. And so in all of these examples and all these rules in Jesus' sermon, he talks about these rules, but then he takes it to another level and he takes it deeper and says, he reminds us that it is about relationship with God. And I think if we did that, if we went back, as we kind of unpack our faith and rebuild our faith, and we put things together based on, this is the heart of God in this matter, how would that change us? Not, that's the church's rule. But what is the heart of God? And why? You see, Jesus pushes back against legalistic practices of rules as spirituality, but he doesn't throw away rules. He doesn't throw them all out. He says, no, we need them, and I'm going to fulfill the law. I'm not here to tear it down. But you guys got it all wrong in the way you're looking at it. Another example I might use to help us understand. Imagine a target, okay? You guys know you're looking in the back. Imagine that's a big target back there. We got a little photo booth back there. Imagine there's a bullseye in the middle of that thing, okay? And imagine that the ring of the flowers is the outside of the target. And imagine that I'm standing here. This would be kind of cool. I should have thought of this earlier. I would have brought one. Imagine I'm standing here with a bow and arrow, right? And I'm going to show off before you all and show my mad archery skills. I'm not going to be happy just hitting the target, right? Some of you would laugh if I didn't hit the target. And so for some, maybe it's just good enough to kind of be on the target. But really what your aim is the bullseye, right? That's what you're aiming for. And so the idea here is we are aiming for the bullseye, which is our relationship with God. We're not trying, see, here, this is really what rules are. Rules are, we sometimes are there to establish the outside, the edge of the target, and then but really, the rules aren't the point. The point is the heart of God, which is the middle. And so when we make it about rules, we're concerned about the outside of the target. We don't care about the bullseye at all. Am I on the target? Did I follow the rules? And what does that do? What does that do for us? Well, it basically means we either become morally and ethically anemic because we lose sight of who God is, or we become incredibly judgmental, right? Well, you didn't hit the target. You're off the target. Who's on the target? What is the target? You know, and it all becomes about whether you're in or you're out, whether you did it right, did it wrong. And the funny thing is, that's always changing, depending on the group. Oh, well, you didn't do it enough. You should do it more. You should do this less. You should, all these things. Instead of aiming at Jesus, right? Aiming at being with God, that relationship. And so as we bump up against difficult questions and issues, even as our own sort of, if you will, as God's rules come into contrast with our culture, if we lose sight of Jesus, if we lose sight of the heart of God, we're gonna miss it. And we'll either become judgmental or we'll become so loose that we have no morals and no ethics. That's all that can happen because we've simply misunderstood how it works. You see, maturation, spiritual maturation, as in just human maturation, is a move from what to why. It's kind of how we go from, well, this is what I'm supposed to do, to, well, why am I doing it, right? There's a deeper understanding that comes. That's how we should grow spiritually. We got to keep our eyes fixed on the center of the target. You see, rules are rooted in relationship. They're rooted in relationship to God. You know, as we think about this, I think this has profound impact. And as we wrestle, perhaps with faith questions at times, we got to take it back to a relationship with God. Now, we don't always get the answer to the question why on everything, but that's what makes obedience to God an act of faith. That's what makes it an act of faith. There is a faith issue here. But the faith comes from relationship. So as we think about these things, I hope that as you reflect on your faith and as you wrestle with faith, perhaps, maybe you're not wrestling at all, maybe you're wrestling a lot, I encourage us to take it back to relationship. Start there. That's where it begins. It begins with God, it begins with His heart, because that is the bullseye of the target. Let's pray. God in heaven, thank you so much for all the many ways you bless us. And God, we want to be with you, God. We want to walk with you. God, we're so grateful to be called your people. And God, I pray that as we reflect on these things, and there are many quote-unquote rules, God, that we perhaps could talk about or discuss, but really, God, we want to know your heart. We want to connect with you, God. We want to be in relationship with you. And God, I pray that the things that we do, the way that we live, the choices we make as we live in community together, under you, God, I pray that it would always emanate from a place of relationship, that we'd always go back to understanding and seeing you. And God, I pray that would help us to build and develop our faith in a way that is rooted in your personhood, God, who you are, and not simply in what we think may or may not be right. God, help us to hit the bullseye. Help us to forget the outside of the target. But God, help us to land right in the center with you always. And in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.